Welcome back to As It Turned Out, hosted by your favorite CU sophomore, Pananika Zimaruna. This is the podcast about the messy, beautiful process of figuring it out as we go. We're not here for perfect paths. We're here for moments of doubt, the big pivots, and the quiet wins that don't make it onto our LinkedIns. We're talking about what it actually looks like to grow, adapt, and to make your own way, one unexpected move at a time. Let's get into it. So, hello, Todd. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast today.
Well, thanks for having me, as always.
Okay, let's get started. When you were just starting out, what did you think your career would look like, and how close is that to where you ended up?
Oh, Lord. So it's interesting. So if you think back to high school years, my freshman year in high school, I had a really good art teacher, like a fantastic art teacher. I went to a prep school in Connecticut and wore a tie and all of that stuff. And so I really got into drawing and painting and all of that stuff. And so I was like, art, that's totally going to be a thing for me. And then I moved when I was a junior in high school to Ohio, and I had a terrible art teacher. But I had a really good mechanical drawing teacher. And so it was interesting as we were starting to look at colleges and trying to figure out what we're going to do. I was like, I don't know. And so I looked at industrial design, I looked at architecture, and I looked at graphic design. And I had a friend who was going into graphic design, and that seemed interesting, but I liked architecture as a thought, mostly because it was like a little bit technical. And then it just required kind of mass memorization and some other pieces. And I wasn't a good enough artist to be an industrial designer. Like those guys were killer. And so they could draw anything. And so it was fun. And so I hung out with all of them when I went to art school. And I learned a little bit about every one of those. So my original thought was I was going to be an architect. So that's really where my head was, circa 1990, when I started this whole crazy journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. And kind of like you were talking about, you moved through architecture, design, and tech. And what was kind of the thread that kind of tied all of those together for you?
Oh, I mean, it's sort of like probably the biggest thread, and you'll hear me say this repeatedly, is just curiosity. Like everything's interesting to me. And so like I just have to figure out where I'm going to put my time. But like anything that seems difficult or weird or whatever, like I'm about. And so architecture held that for a little bit. And then I did my first internship and I saw that in general, like a lot of people were wildly incurious and a lot of the work that was done was very pattern matchy. And I didn't love that at all. I was like, this is terrible. Like, why would you do this? You're not actually solving design problems. You're solving engineering problems, but not even as an engineer. You're solving them as, the bathroom needs to be exactly this big or else we don't hit ADA guidelines. And so that was not interesting at all. And so I quit, like pretty much as soon as I finished my internship. I was like, I'm out of here. I can't do this anymore. And then I went to Ohio State for computer science, thinking that I was going to be an animator, which is also hilarious. So I wound up not doing that either, but I sort of did it. And so it's weird. So anywho, the thread, I guess, through all of it is just, I really liked design as a way of being more than like the actual like doing the thing. I liked just the thought of using your brain to come up with something beautiful. So I liked that. And then I was more technical than most of my friends. Like I just dug in and was programming and doing all of that. And I wasn't as good as like the really hardcore programmers, but I had a better eye than all of them. And I could talk to people. And so it was like this like perfect storm of all of that was sort of my career. So the thread that tied it all together was curiosity, having a good eye, and wanting to bring beauty to the world. And then I think being able to talk about all of that stuff and like bring it at a level that people like understood and found enjoyable. Because I found that like most people can't do that third one very well. And so that was sort of my like my secret sauce, if nothing else. So,
Yeah,
so that.
I know you've talked a lot about how networking is a really big part of your career and your
Oh,
life.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was the very first thing that happened to me. So like I was at Ohio State and I was figuring out like I had no idea what I was going to do for a living. I was DJing full time. I was going to school full time. It something had to break at some point. And so at one of my clubs, a lot of the advertising folk would come to it because that's what happens.
Mhm.
Advertising folks love clubs. And so I was friends with a ton of them. I was dating one of them even. And so out of that came an opportunity because I was known within that community. Well, one as a really awesome DJ, but also like I was relatively technical, and they kind of knew that I could do stuff. I was like the first person to have a website in like the city, and so from that, I got my first break as like the guy who went to an ad agency to do basically explain why their technical or their web agency was doing what they were doing. So I was like the translator.
Yeah.
I didn't get paid a lot, but it was eye opening. I got to like see the interior of an ad agency, not as an intern, but like as an employee, which is crazy. And then that just kind of like blossomed and moved and continued on.
Yeah. Do you think that kind of like uncertainty at that time helped you become the person you are today?
Sure. Like nobody knew what we were going to do. Like, the early 90s were super uncertain, very similar in some ways to the way things were in the late 2010s, so 2008 through 2010. Just like people were losing their jobs, there was a lot of like seismic shift in the way work happened. And then the web hit in 95, and then all of a sudden, like everyone under the age of 30 had a job,
Yeah.
and it was weird. And then, like the best part about it, the worst part about it actually, was that all of us were like running companies. We were all
Mhm.
morons. We had zero business sense. We had no idea how any of the stuff worked. But we just went for it, and it worked or it didn't, and that was fine. We just moved on to the next thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess very different than it is today in that way, in that there was more opportunity for people without college educations to just like go for it and then like become well known in their thing just because they did. um yeah, there's more risk.
Yeah.
So
Kind of with that like ambition you're talking about, what's one lesson about creative leadership that took you years to learn but now shapes how you lead?
so many lessons. I think there's all sorts of things to know. The big one is that as you grow in your career, there's still lots of lessons to be learned from the young. And so it's important to like step back and offer guidance and not be super hands-on, which is hard because as you're coming up, you're rewarded for production, and you're rewarded for leadership and thoughts and all of that stuff. And sometimes you got to let that go in order to be able to scale. And that's a lesson that you'll learn the hard way more often than not. Like when to let go and when to celebrate. Um, it took me a long time. I ran a lot of teams before I learned that lesson, and badly. Probably another one, while I'm thinking about it, similarly, is the things that brought you up there aren't necessarily what they need anymore. And so another thought was when I was younger, Gen X guy, and showing up in like, a variety of companies run by boomers. And the thing that I hated the most was how like all in they were.
Mm.
It's like, oh my God. Like I didn't want to wear a t-shirt that's had the company name on it. I didn't want to have to like hang out with them after work. Like I didn't want any of that stuff. Like that was all tedious. And so I was like, man, it's going to be amazing when I grow up and I'm the manager. I don't have to do any of that stuff. It's going to be amazing. And so then I grew up and I became that manager, and all of the millennials that worked for me all wanted the t-shirt and wanted to hang out after work, and all wanted to be like one big happy family. And I was like, oh man, like the thing I didn't want is what all of them want. I guess I have to do this now. And so I never escaped it. And as much as I rebelled against it, it was a bad idea. So
Yeah. Well, I know you worked with some pretty big clients. What do the creative collaborations have in common, and who are some of your favorite clients you've worked with?
they're all different. I think, again, I like most of them. Let's see. So if I go through the list of things that were important in my career, I worked with FedEx a long time. And so, again, for the people watching this who don't know who the hell I am, one of my claims to fame was that I worked with FedEx for about 7 years and designed the replacement of the Power Pad, which is the handheld device that every single courier globally uses. And so if you're thinking, oh my God, that took 7 years, it took 7 years because 3 of them were basically trying to convince them that they needed something new. And then the other 4 were actually like working through a monster corporation to make an app happen that worked and touched every piece of their entire infrastructure. So that was fun. So what I liked about them, I mean, they were frustrating. It's like working with like your little sister or something. Like they had no idea what was happening in the world of mobile. And they fought me every step of the way. But they, their heart was in the right place and they listened and they wanted to do global research to really understand who their people were. So I love that about them. They were, I think the thing that I would tell my other designers was that I would tell them 2 things. One, I'd make them watch Office Space. Because it's exactly the world that they were getting themselves into, which was super weird for a bunch of European designers in their 20s. They had no idea. But then the other, what was the other thing? The other thing that was fun about working with FedEx is that I used to joke that we were all magicians because our job was to bring the present to the past. And so they had no idea what was happening. And so as opposed to being a futurist where I'm like, oh, in 3 years, agentic AI is going to be the thing that you're going to be the most excited about. I didn't have to do any of that. I just had to tell them what was happening today, and it was magic to them. So that was fun. So that's one. I worked with Adidas for a while, and what I learned from them was that it was super high fidelity internally was the most important thing to them.
Yeah.
And it was a hard lesson to learn because I was working at an industrial design studio where fidelity was very important to us internally, but that most of our clients didn't care. And we were just making PowerPoint decks and trying to get people to move forward. And the thought was the most important thing. So making a brilliant 2x2 was way more important than making sure I had the right photo.
Yeah.
At Adidas, the opposite was true. Nothing got through unless it looked like an ad campaign. And I learned the lesson the hard way because I was working very much like a researcher for a while with them, and they were just not picking up anything I was saying. They would not listen. And then all of a sudden I was like, all right, I guess I'll just put on my graphic designer hat and make this beautiful. And as soon as I did that, even though the thought was thin, it totally sold.
Right.
And so I guess that's another good lesson to learn is what's important internally to a company and what actually greases the skids to get something through. And where does that live? When I work with Amazon, it's the opposite of that completely, and everything I do has to be super well researched. There's no deck, everything's in writing, and it is. Every sentence is completely scrutinized before it ever moves forward. So they're all different, and I love all of that. Every one of those is kind of an interesting thing to solve.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And kind of tying into that outside of your work, I know you DJ, as you were talking about before, and you've taught. Sure. How do those creative outlets feed into your professional life and your jobs you work?
Yeah. It's fun about being a designer. Because I guess I'm still a designer after all of this time. I'm a consultant, but I'm a designer too. Is you get to really, you get to decide what to do. So earlier in my career, like when I first moved to Portland, I was freelancing for Second Story, which was a big company here in town that did kind of like installation pieces for museums and other types of like really like beautiful, high fidelity, like interactive work. Um, and they didn't want me to do any of that. They just asked me to make a musical piece for them. And so like I always got to like figure out how to like twist my hobbies into like part of my work,
That's
which was super fun. And so like, I had better musical taste than most people I knew. And so like, and I had a better like breadth of understanding of like what was happening in the world. And so I could use that as a designer in fun ways. So, um, yeah, I guess the big idea is, and then that's how I got into video and how I got back into animation.
yeah,
It was all like saying, sure, I could probably figure that out, and then just doing it. And that kind of feeds my curiosity again. And then I learn how to do a task or a skill, and then I build off of that. So I guess the TLDR on that is if you have hobbies, you don't have to isolate them from your work. Sometimes you want to. So like right now, I'm working on music and it's completely separate from work. Like it's 100%. My goal is like 100% to like release tracks and get on labels and show up in resident advisor. That's all like what I want to do in the next like year. And none of that has anything to do with work. And
yeah,
it's awesome to have a complete separation. But at the same time, I think when you're coming up, being able to intertwine and interleave some of that stuff makes you better at both.
yeah. I know you're doing more consulting now. What kind
Yeah.
of got you into doing that? What was the transition moment for you?
It's fun. So it's been a long journey to get to consulting. So when
Mhm.
I started, again, like I started, it was all website stuff and very much like what we would now call a digital agency, but at the time we didn't have a word for it. It was like web builders or whatever. So I did that, and that was a nice combination of like tech and design, and that worked really well for my heart. And what I learned during that time was that I worked really well with large corporations.
Yeah.
And so like startups, I'm terrible with. Like I don't vibe with them. They don't vibe with me because I really want to have some precision in the work. And I want to have like a long goal, not like a series of very short goals.
Hmm.
Um, there are people who would love startup culture, and that's just not me. I can do it. I understand it like intellectually, but that's not really where my skills are. My skills are like hammering at a problem and making it better over time. And so anyway, so I learned that that was sort of my gig. And then I did a stint where I was trying to like figure out what that transition was. And so there was this world in like the early 2000s where consultancies were trying to figure out how to become digital agencies, and it was messy on both sides because they came from a world where they were doing like SAP integrations and stuff like that, and they were trying to figure out like how to be brand agencies, and it was bad. So I was part of that like shift just to see like if that would work, and it didn't work. Like it was bad all around. I got into and then I got into advertising, like big monster advertising, for a number of years, and I learned a lot from that. And I worked with really big companies, and that was enjoyable to some degree. It was enjoyable that I got to work with big companies, and we got to solve big problems. It was not enjoyable in that I was working on like the tail end of product design, like the please buy our thing, and that's really what I was working on over and over again. It was tedious. Um, so it's a long journey to say what I learned. I liked, and then I spent 10 years at an industrial design firm where it was all about innovation.
Yeah.
Um, so what I learned from each one of those jobs taught me a new thing. The early web stuff taught me a lot about like taking risk and playing. And like play could be a thing you could actually deliver as a product. Um, the stuff about the ad agency taught me a lot about how to take a product and make people love it, ex post facto. And then the industrial design firm taught me a lot about like how big companies deal with innovation? Like, how do they mitigate risk? How do they deal with research that then tells them what to do or not to do? And so I took all of that and I was like, all right, after 10 years of working on that and flying around the world and all of the things that came with that, I was like, I think what I actually am now is I'm a consultant. Like, wouldn't it be nice to work at a company where I had all the developers working with me to go deliver the product? And I understand enough about organizational change that like I'm actually a viable person in this space. And I still like to make stuff, so I'm a little bit weird in consulting land. But it's somewhat celebrated at the same time.
Yeah.
So blah, 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 blah. Consulting just sort of like, I think I needed to learn enough skills in a variety of places in order to not feel like a fraud in the world of consulting. And then many of my coworkers have zero problems with the fraud part. And so I always find that interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, kind of to wrap it up, looking back at all the twists, pivots, and surprises, what's something that you've learned and you want to tell young professionals about how things turn out?
Oh, well, one, don't freak out when things pivot and change. And so I guess I'd say we're in this seismic change land again, just as I was in 94. AI's really, really, really changing every other week. I'm spending all my time in it. You will too.
Yes.
And both as a practitioner and as a user. So kind of go with the flow with that. Things that were important 2 years ago are not important anymore. And so like being able to like write a really tight business plan is very different today than it was 2 years ago. And so it's important to be thoughtful about that. And so I think the big idea, if you learn anything from my journey, is just like curiosity wins. Fearlessness is helpful. Maybe arrogance is another way to think about that. And like you'll know you're in the right place if you love parts of the thing you do. So like I work with people who love organizational change. Like that's their favorite thing in the whole wide world. Great. It's not my favorite thing. I'm good at it, but I don't love it. But they don't love technology. And I love new technology. I love learning stuff. I love being able to say that I have a new language that I've learned, like program in 15 or 16 different languages at this point. Like it's all fun. So if you know that that's what you love, go forth and conquer. And I think the big idea, last but not least, for consulting people, because I'm assuming that's people who watch your stuff, there's all sorts of consultants and they do all sorts of different things. So figure out your niche and then like go for it. And it'll get broader and it'll get narrower as consulting changes. But I think that's the fun part. And I guess last but not least, as I always say, work on your speaking skills. So like that's the most important thing you have as a consultant. Actually, two. One is like the ability to think in frameworks and then like bring them back to people is wildly important, but also being convincing and thinking about how you deal with the theater of interacting with clients is probably the most important skill you'll ever learn. And it just takes time. So take those speaking classes, take those, do those Toastmaster things, whatever it takes. And then just say yes anytime somebody wants you to give a talk. Every time.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.